Hey there, everyone. Welcome to A Slice of Life with Kellie and Jon. Today, our guest is the fabulous Linda Seger, who has been introduced to us by Heather Hale, Jon's other fabulous friend. Linda, I don't even know where to start after reading your bio. You've done so much. You have such a phenomenal career. Jon, what do you say? Where do we start with her? Because you guys have a lot in common.
Well, yeah. Yeah. Yes, it is. It's just that it's interesting that one of your most recent books is your memoir. Okay, we'll get to
Yes.
that. We'll get to that. What's interesting is that I guess in the timeline of writing, she wrote her memoir at the right time. This is when you write it after you have done many things and you want to impart this to people. Where with me, my memoir was my first book,
Ha!
but that was only because I never expected to write another book after that. I had a story I wanted to tell people, especially in New Jersey and the metropolitan New York metropolitan area. Really enjoyed it, and certainly the rest of the country. But uh, that was it. That's all I planned to do. But then after a couple of years, people are like, "Well, when are you going to write another book?" So uh,
How many
I
books later now? Where are you? Eight?
Yeah, that was 6 books ago. Yeah, so that's the interesting thing. You did and I was also. Let me think. I was in my mid to late 50s when the book came out. So that's also a good time. You don't write a memoir like, some of these like Justin Bieber, who was 19 and he wrote a memoir. You have to live some life.
Wait a
You,
minute.
you know,
Wait a minute. Was
uh-oh.
we had a guest, Annette, was her name Annette, who
And that
told us
fix,
a memoir can be any part of your piece of your life, right?
yes, yes, yes. But you have to go through some part of that life.
Well, Justin Bieber might have
to,
had
you
some
know,
help.
it's true. A memoir is a slice of your life. It's not a
Yeah.
biography or autobiography. It's not your entire life. It's just this thing. But it usually has some kind of moral or something that you want to pass along.
Lesson
This
that
is
you've
what
learned.
I did. Here's what you could get from this.
Yeah.
You know, uh,
Yes.
so doing it that young. And Justin, if you want your agent to call me, please have
But
him.
I don't want to discourage younger people from doing it because I think it's very inspiring. And if you've
Absolutely.
had something happen that you want to share with people, I think it's a good thing.
Yes. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm telling you how I see it. I just see a memoir as
Yeah.
get a little go through life a little bit before you impart some wisdom to us. And so I'm sorry with that I took so much time away from yours, but that's what I wanted to say. You did it correctly. You did all of these things, which we'll talk about now, and I'll shut up.
Yes.
And then you wrote about highlights of these things, I'm sure. So go ahead, tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I'm best known because I created a new career in the film industry called script consulting. And I started it in 1981. And I base my method of analyzing and troubleshooting scripts on a doctoral dissertation I did about what makes a script work or what makes a script not work. What are the problem areas? All of them. So many things about theme and structure and storytelling and all that. And I made this because it eventually became an international career. I had clients in on all the continents except Antarctica, and I probably in that time consulted on close to 2,500 scripts before my retirement in 2020. And out of that grew doing seminars on writing. And I would do these weekend seminars, usually Saturday and Sunday. And at first, I went around the United States and did them in many cities. And then in 1988, I did my first seminar abroad, which was in Australia. And in that time, from 1988 until I retired in 2020, I was in 33 different countries. And some of those countries I went back to, like I did several seminars in Germany and England and Paris and Vienna. And I mean, I just had a wonderful life. And then, but out of the script consulting and partly the seminars grew the books. And my first book, Making a Good Script Great, came out at the end of 87. And it came out when there was a writer's strike and writers were not allowed to write. And there had not really been a screenwriting book in 10 years. So supposedly, as the writers stood in the picket line, they read my book, Making a Good Script Great. And it made a splash. It was, it was like the red carpet that unfolds for you and opens up the world. And that's really what my first book did. And like you, when I went, after I wrote my first book, my agent said, "What is your second book going to be about?" And I said, "Well, am I supposed to write another book?" And she said, "Yes." So the second one was Creating Unforgettable Characters. And I have 19 books total. 10 of them are on screenwriting and filmmaking, and 9 of them have something to do with spirituality, such as spirituality and creativity. I put memoirs partly under there because there's a chapter on spiritual transformations. I have my doctorate is actually in drama and theology, which is known as the least marketable degree you could get in the whole world. And there was no choice. I had to start my own business because nobody was going to hire me with that degree. And because I had this background, theology and spirituality as well, I got interested and I had something to say in those areas. So I did 9 books in those areas. And then a number of those books have various editions. So Making a Good Script Great has 3 editions. So I think it was 33 or 34 total if you count writing the editions, because writing an edition, you have to change a minimum of 20%. And I think sometimes I change more than that.
Wow.
Well, I was actually gonna talk to you about that, and I'm actually glad that you're on and we could talk about that because I try to explain this to writers, younger writers. I didn't really deal with screenplays until 2001 ish.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I moved out to LA a couple of years ago and actually did something stupid. I went there to write a book, and you don't sell books in LA, you sell screenplays. So it was recommended that I learn the process, and certainly I did. And what I learned then, somewhere by around 2011 or so, those formatting rules and things that you would need to put on the page and lay out on a page in a scene heading changed. It was like one day, oh, we're going to do it this way now. And then somewhere a handful of years ago, it was like, okay, we're not going to capitalize sounds anymore. That was a big thing. We had to do that. Now we're not going to do that anymore. I'm sure you've had to deal with this in new editions for each of your screenwriting books.
Well, I didn't have to deal with that even in my consulting, because pretty much all my clients had learned the formatting.
At the time,
there were
whatever was
books out
happening.
there. This is
Right.
how you do it. And the same thing with a book is you're going to have chapters and figure out your font and things like that. So that was not a problem. And my first books had publishers, meaning well known publishers, including some publishers that focus on film. And then because publishing changed so much the last maybe 6, 8 years, I actually formed my own publishing company. It's called Red Typewriter Press, and I bet you can guess what my logo is.
It's a red
And
typewriter.
Red type.
and the and what I found, there's advantages both ways, but the things in going through the publishers is you have to get an agent, and then you spend ages with the agent trying to sell the proposal, and then you finally sell it, and then you take a year to write it, and 6 months before it actually comes out. What I found is because all you have to really do is get a book on Amazon, that I could, it usually takes me about a year to write a book. And my writing schedule is about 2 mornings a week. And I can do that in a year. Of course, I've done a lot of thinking about the book before that. And once I'm done with the book and I have my cover designer, and I have a wonderful cover designer, my editor gets that on Amazon within weeks. So that long period of 6 to 9 months after you finish everything before the book is even published, it's out very quickly, and you doesn't mean everybody finds it. There's advantages with another publishing company, and a few of my books are with them. They do some marketing, not too much, but they're kind of known, or anyway, there's some advantages. But as I got older, I said I want my timeline to be shorter, so I have done that. I think the last 5 books or something like that.
Yeah. Well, that's what you've done with your books too, Jon. I have some books on Amazon also. It's kind of easier. You've got control of everything. You're not battling artistic ideas, and I liked having more control. I don't know that anybody wanted, mine were like manuals for courses I taught. And one was a children's book. So I don't know if really any publisher would want to touch mine anyway, but I like the idea of having the full control over it all. Right, Jon? Don't you feel like that?
Well, yes and no. My situation specifically was no 2 of my 6 books are of the same genre. And the first thing an agent asks you is, so what genre do you write? And I'm like, well, pick one. What do you want? Oh, I can't do that. I only represent this kind of work,
Yes.
which it just dazzles me. It really, people ask me, well, why do you do that? And again, I don't mean to take away from your part of this interview, but I did it because coming from even before my corporate world, my music business career, I loved playing rock and roll, but I also had to learn how to play an acoustic guitar, and I had to learn how to play songs that weren't heavy. They weren't rock. I had to be able to read off of a chart. Just because I liked this, I had to be able to do this. I worked a lot because I was a well-rounded musician. I knew how to do many different styles of music. And at the time, my manager loved me for that because he could book me in any situation. An agent loved me for that because they were able to put me in the studio with any situation. So I figured, okay, I'll write a bunch of different genres. And, of course, I didn't want to try it after one book because I knew that they'd go, so what else you got? And I didn't have anything. So I figured, let me give a well-rounded, so after my 4th book, uh, I went out and I have a wonderful attorney in Century City. Uh, we went out, sent out some really good letters and stuff. And other than being told, and I probably mentioned this to you, Kelly, but other than being told, sorry, he's all over the place. I just handle this kind of genre. I was also told they'd never put it in writing, but I was also told that I had hit the gray wall. I was a little too old to be breaking into a new career with four completed books, and so at a certain point, it just was I was just happy self-publishing and like you said, doing it all myself. You find a cover artist that works for you, a formatter who works, who sets your book up correctly. And I have a couple of editors just like you do. And I make a little bit of fantasy become a reality. That's it. And
Yes.
I have more control over it.
Well, I have a
Yeah.
question. What do you have a tip for us? Like, you're not going to share everything about your whole book, but like, what's the most dynamic part of a script? Like, what makes it the most special?
Well, it's sometimes there's a joke sort of about storytelling in a screenplay, and they just say there's three things: structure, structure, structure. And what they really mean is if you don't have a foundation on how to tell the story, which means how do you set up the story, how do you develop it, and how do you pay it off. And those I call the craft of writing. So every writer needs to know their art, their craft, and their creative process. And sometimes you're better at craft before you're actually better as an artist. And sometimes you have a very fresh, wonderful, unique voice as an artist. And the problem is you don't know how to craft it. You don't know how to put this story together, that it moves and that it has dimensional characters and that there's a theme that moves through the whole script. So that's what seminars and most books on screenwriting are about. Now, I think, in a sense, is when you work on your craft, you're also nurturing your art process. And so you're always balancing the two. And one of the things I discovered as a script consultant, I could nurture the artist's, the writer's creativity. I could bring that script up to the best level they could for where their creativity was, but I could bring their script up to a high level of craft. And I had a vice president at one of the production companies once said to me, we couldn't figure out what you did as a script consultant. We read you were a problem solver and troubleshooter. But she said we had several clients and the level of the craft was so high. That story was told so tightly and so cleanly and so clearly, but it wasn't a very good story. And she says, we finally figured it out. All of them had gone to you and had, so that I could do professionally. And of course, I had many talented writers during that time. And then comes the marketing. So just when a screenwriter learns how to write a script, learns the art and the craft, and has a number of scripts so that when they say, what else do you have something to show them. Then you have to know marketing. And so how do I get this to a producer? How do I get it into production? And that is a whole level of work on itself. It's very difficult, as selling a proposal for a book is. And I didn't get too involved in that. I knew some people, and sometimes I was able to get writers' jobs because a producer might hire me and say, we need somebody to rewrite this. We don't want to stay with this same writer. And then I would say, well, I know someone who works in that genre, who's very successful, who's experienced, and I could get that person a job. But that wasn't really what I was about. I was about working with the art, craft, and creativity of the writer and helping them solve problems and make that script the very best they could make it.
And didn't you do you do script writing? What was it called, John? What did you do?
I was a script doctor.
Script doctor.
Okay.
Is that the same thing or different?
No.
I would have been one of those people that the studio or production company would option a script, buy a script, and then tell the writer, we love it. It's fantastic. We don't have to change a word. And then they send the writer home, and then they send the
Call
script
you.
to me, and they go, okay, here's our notes. Make it work, you know.
Yes.
Turn
And
the
that,
character that his mother into a car or something like
yeah.
that. And because the writer, the original writer, is a little too close to the project and often, you know, complains a lot if they want to, if the people now who technically own the story want to change it dramatic, what the writer would feel is dramatic. So you get somebody who has no direct ties to it, and we would just be happy to take that money from the producers to put in to implement their notes into the script so that it reads the way the script's supposed to read, just like
And
Linda's.
sometimes they would bring in a script actor to do a dialogue rewrite, to just say we love the story, but the dialogue
Hmm.
isn't quite fresh,
Right,
or to say just to fix up the third act. So
right.
that's a writing job. What was unusual about my idea of script consulting and my job was I didn't write. And at the beginning, people would say, how can you be a script consultant and not write? Supposedly Warren Beatty found out about me and someone recommended me to him, and he said, what good is she? Is she's never won an Academy Award, never written a script. And the whole thing was I was more objective because I wasn't looking at the script like I'm going to write it. I was looking at it, how do I help the writer find a stronger voice and solve these problems? And so I was standing back. I had no dog in that fight. I had no stakes in terms of that. I was just trying to, and sometimes it was the director hired me, sometimes producers. Um, but it was a different way. And eventually, people figured out after I'd been around a while that actually that did make sense to stay objective. Now, there are script consultants out there who are also screenwriters, and sometimes they are script consultants because they're not making a living at screenwriting. And sometimes they like both roles, and so they work as a script consultant, and then the writer says, would you rewrite this for me and let me pay you to be the writer? And because you can make it work faster than I can because you have more experience. So it's not to say that someone who's both is not really good at both. But in my case, I just stuck with the consulting, and I really loved it. I just enjoyed working with the writer. And one of the things, I was very good at diplomacy, on making the writer feel good and not get defensive. And I think that was, somebody said, well, what was the secret of your success as a script consultant? I'd say one of the secrets was I had done a lot of work in psychology and college and graduate school. And so I knew how to make the writer feel comfortable and excited about improving their script as opposed to defensive about improving the script. And, some of the writers is like, I can hardly wait to get back to my home or my office because now I know what to do. And I didn't know what to do with my script before. I just knew it had a problem.
Well, you see, there's another thing that talking about the time that you said you got in it around, I think, 88,
1981.
81. Okay. So when I got into it, at least uh not right away, but shortly after that, scripts came via email.
Mm-hmm.
Back in
Yes.
1981, there was no email. Scripts
Right.
came in an envelope, and she had to sit there and read it
Yeah.
and redline it, or whatever color pen you would like
Mm-hmm.
to use. And you had to go through it that way. And you probably had stacks and stacks of screenplays on
Yeah.
your desk, I can imagine.
Yes.
And
Well,
up
eventually.
until the early 2000s, I remember that.
But I always read a hard copy. And
Yeah.
so they would send me the hard copy. Now, if it was from abroad or something, that they could send it to me through email. but I would get the hard copy, and I enjoyed having, that copy in my hands. But I would read it, I would make notes, I would make a report, I would write notes on the script. And so it was a fairly big process. And another thing I think made my business successful, I had a lot of different services because, some people can afford 5,000, 7,500s. And so that service had lots and lots of details. I went through every line. I looked at the rhythms of the dialogue, etc. But some people would have maybe a page about a storyline. They said, is this viable? And I would look at that storyline and say, it is, but here's how you go about developing it. And here's the place this is going to take you off track. So you don't need that. And I could give somebody a lot of information, even about a paragraph. I had a service, it was $50, and I would look at a paragraph and sort of a basic story, basic storyline, real small storyline. And one client said to me, you're going to charge me $50 to look at a paragraph. And I said, yes. I said, now you could go to your Aunt Mary, and Aunt Mary will read it and tell you it's just wonderful. You could come to me and you're going to have loads of information because I'm going to tell you lots of stuff to do to develop this. And so he says, okay, I'll pay you the $50. He said, oh my goodness, I can't believe everything I learned from you with one paragraph of a storyline. So, and the reason of spreading out, how much things cost so much is I thought I want to be accessible to everybody, to be helpful. And so, studios sometimes wanted more information. And there are a lot of writers that said, look, I want everything you can tell me, go for it. And so I think that was very smart. And I started by thinking of marketing not on what it was worth, but what would people pay, considering nobody knew me, they had never heard of me, and they had never paid for the service before. So at the beginning, I was extremely cheap. And one of my clients, I did all this work for $35, about 1981, and one of my clients said, there was no way I'm only going to give you $35 for everything you've done. And he said, here's a $100 bill. And I thought, oh, good, I guess I can start raising my prices. So I was very careful in terms of building this business. And I think another thing was I went to a career consultant who I met through Women in Film, who was brilliant. And I said, how do I make this work? I love what I'm doing. I'm only getting it. It's just a part-time business for 2 years. I said, I have to get more clients and raise my rates to make a living at this. And this is really what I want to do. I was sort of a natural entrepreneur. So I did better than working in a corporation. And she said, okay, we're going to take this step by step to help you become a success. And I worked with her off and on for 2 years. And so about mid 84 and 85, it started to take off. And then once I started doing international, as well as the seminars, is that the seminars fed back into the script consulting. And by the late 80s, things were going really well. And so I did this till 2020. So I just had a wonderful career doing all these different parts of it.
Yeah, that's so smart of you and inspirational of you to see the potential of what you could be and then kind of create this new genre of consulting. And you imagine all the people you helped. I mean,
Yes.
are there any scripts that you fixed up that we would know, that we would recognize?
Well, you might know the second Never Ending Story. And I was the script consultant on that. And what had happened was the producers liked the writers, but the script wasn't working. And they were thinking of firing her, and then you have to get another writer, and sometimes the other writer takes it in new directions. So the writer said, what about hiring Linda Seger? And they said, okay. And I worked a lot, partly with theme and partly to keep the story moving and have some magic. I think there's a wonderful sort of flying dog scene, and I encourage them to make it longer and to actually structure that scene, you know, that it was sort of magical. But I'd say I worked a lot with what does this story mean? And what are people going to take away from it? And I understand the writer of the book actually liked the second one better than the first, which is great. And another one that, you know, you said, what's the favorite script you worked on? I worked on a script called Luther. It was about Martin Luther, the Lutheran, the Reformation from the 1500s. And I just loved working with because the producers, several were from Germany and several were from the United States. And we met a few times. And when I was called in, they just, everybody was fighting with everyone. It was, the script was a mess and they just didn't know what to do. Now, the advantage I had, I grew up Lutheran and I had this theological degree, plus I had all this work with drama, and I restructured the entire script. I mean, where it started ended up being 2/3 of the way through, and so I and the writer and one of the producers went into a hotel room for 2 days, and we restructured this. And the other producers said, "Can't we just sit in? We just won't talk." And I said, "No, it's going to be the three of us." And I said, "We will come back and tell you the story at the end of the second day as it evolved. And so the second day, we told them the story as it was restructured, and we finished, and they applauded, and they were very happy with it. And I had asked them ahead of time, I said, now, with all of you, is there something you must see in this script that we must not cut? And we will make sure whatever that is, it stays in. And several of the producers said, I have to see such and such. And I said, okay, we will do it. And then the writer went as far as she could, the original one. And there were problems in the third act. And I gave them some ideas, but it wasn't really quite working. And they brought in another writer who was somebody that I knew and really liked. And he fixed the third act. I kind of gave him what I saw structurally would work. And I said, but all of these things have to be extremely well structured to make this third act work. One of the problems with the third act is that when the Catholics kind of bowed down and recognized that they weren't going to be able to fight this, Martin Luther was not in that scene, and that was the climactic scene. But he wasn't there. So the question was, how do you make it feel like he is there, and how do you build it? And so we worked a lot with being able to build it with Martin Luther back quietly in another town, and it worked. But it was one of those things that you structure and you say, I know it's not supposed to work. It never works, but we're going to make it work. And we're going to make it work because we know all this different stuff. You know, I knew how to structure. I knew how to build a scene and develop. You know, I knew a lot of stuff and said, we're going to make this work, even if it's impossible to make it work. But I think it worked.
Good. Yeah. I like it when things are, you break the rules
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
you say, this is the rule, this is the structure, this is the way everybody does it. And I find that so boring. And I find, usually that's how things change is when one person, company, whoever breaks the rule. They're like, I'm not going to do it that way. I don't care if that's the way it's supposed to be done. I'm going to do it this way. And then all of a sudden, got a
And
new
those are the movies or those are the projects that you usually they come out ahead. They're noted for being different
yeah.
than everything
Yes.
else.
And
Yeah.
working. They still have to work. My book, Advanced Screenwriting, talks about what I call alternative structures. So, like Pulp Fiction or Sliding Doors, and the one where the guy, everything goes backwards. I think there's two films where things go back.
Back to
Benjamin
the future.
Button.
Yeah, and like that one. And again, you take these same elements of craft, the stuff you know about how to craft a script, and you say, I'm still using my elements, but I'm using them differently. And I think, like, for instance, I love Pulp Fiction. I think what Tarantino did with that movie was just extraordinary. And I just was a huge admirer of what he had done and some of these other movies. And eventually, a woman in Australia focused on alternative structures. Her name was Linda Aronson, and she went around the world doing seminars when you want to do an alternative structure and what are some of the ways that you do it. And once in a while I would work on that because I had worked on that in the book, but that was her specialty. And I had, I never met her, but we did a lot of emails back and forth, and I just thought what she was doing was terrific.
Yeah. Well, I have another question about your books and what you do. Um, Developing an unforgettable character. Because as an actor, I was an actor, you have to give yourself a background story and everything. You're creating this character. But what would you recommend is important in creating an unforgettable character?
Well, one of the things is dimensionality. Of course, people say, well, what does that mean? And I would say a character thinks, acts, and feels. I got it down to those three. And then I would do some hours on, my seminars. What does that mean to do that? And how do you think about the character? Let's say, for instance, if your character is very active, if you at the moment that character thinks about what they're going to do, suddenly the character has more life to them. Like one of my favorite characters is Sam Gerard in The Fugitive. And there are 5 times in that movie, Sam just thinks. He just looks, he stands there, he shakes his head like, And you can see, and of course, Tommy Lee Jones is a brilliant actor and he could carry it off. Yeah. Or if you think about emotions, there are some characters, they have no emotional life. So I would talk about characters are mad, scared, glad, sad, or hurt or offended. And I said, all of those have dimensions. You can be mad, you can be irritated, and you can be enraged. But that should come through on the page as this character has an emotional life. And then thinking is not just, well, let's have a voiceover, is that you sense an intellectual life, and sometimes you sense a philosophy or theology, and you don't want your character to sit there and say, well, let me believe in what I believe in and what my value system is, and let me tell you about my spirituality. You don't want them to do that, but what do they do to express what their philosophy is like? Are they racist? You don't have to talk about it. You just have to show it. Are or sexist, or are they kind, and do they reach out to, let's say, somebody with disabilities? And I also think about characters in terms of their context. What happens in a lot of scripts is that characters, they have a boyfriend and they have a girlfriend, and that's kind of their life. Once in a while they have a family, but a lot of times they have no other social context. And you think about, we all probably were parts of organizations, and we're part of friendship circles, and you're part of political groups. Some people go out and they protest, and you're part of that group, and you go off on the retreat or whatever. And as long as that fits in with the storylines, you just don't send them off someplace. But expanding your character into larger social contexts can make a character come to life. So, you think about that area. Value systems. What's your character's value system and how do they express it? So, and in the Creating Unforgettable Character book, the end of every chapter has an interview with a writer that I think has created great characters. So I interviewed the producers of Cheers, for instance, and so I had sitcoms and I had series. I interviewed some of the best series producers to say, how did you approach this, and what are you looking at? And so I did a lot of thinking. What makes that character dimensional? And I would say each of my books, they're dealing with an aspect of writing. So I have a book on writing dialogue, which I co-wrote with a script consultant who's still working, called John Winston Rainey. And then I also did a book on subtext, the underlying, what's going on underneath the surface. So just because somebody says, you say, how you feel? And when they say, I'm fine, I'm okay. And you think, oh, we need to ask some more questions, because obviously that there is subtext there. Or sometimes, as I would say, there's gold and then there are hills. As you go after what's beneath the surface. And that does a lot for characters and for just the richness of your movie.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the fun part of acting, is the dialogue wasn't really what was going on. It was the subtext of what was happening. In my acting school, one of the activities or exercises we did was taking a nursery rhyme. You had to say a nursery rhyme, but you had subtext and make the nursery rhyme, make it clear what you were really feeling and trying to say while I was saying a nursery rhyme. And it was a really fun activity, really challenging and fun. So, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
So, Linda, what?
Sometimes you do that with a song. It seems on the surface the song is just fine, but I grew up in the age of those 1950s Westerns, like Cheyenne, what will you be doing tonight? And, where will you be saying tonight? And you can sing that song that it means a number of different things, just by how you sing it. So, yes.
Okay, because I want to know, what inspired you to write the memoir?
A number of my friends said, when are you going to write your memoir? You've been all over the world. You've learned so much. You've had so many adventures, interacted with so many people. And I said, I never thought of writing a memoir. Should I write a memoir? And my friend said, yes. And they said, I think people would be inspired also, because part of the memoir talks about starting my business and the struggles and the obstacles and how I overcame them. But some of what I wrote about was being a small town girl. I came from a small town of 2,500 people in northern Wisconsin called Peshtigo, and I yearned for adventure. And so there's a little through line through the whole story of this kid who said nothing ever happens in Peshtigo, who ends up, riding a camel and riding an Arabian horse, galloping on an Arabian horse in the Sahara Desert.
Oh, geez.
And so, and one of the things I did whenever I traveled, I always stayed a few extra days. So if I'm in an interesting place, that's really stupid to get on the plane as soon as you finish doing your seminar. And so I had an adventure spirit. I was also very cautious. So I was safety conscious, and I went to a lot of different places and I followed the rules. So in South Africa, when they said, walk down that street to the restaurant, but don't walk down the street 2 blocks over, I walked down the street they told me to, and I said, will I be safe on that street? And they said, yes, do it exactly as we tell you and you will be fine. And, they said, when you go to visit Soweto, make sure you have a Black driver and a Black guide and you will be fine. And there were, one of the things I did, I was invited and went to many interesting places like Dubai, and I was in Indonesia right after some floods, and we had to decide if it was safe to go there because the city was really a disaster zone. And our host said, we're keeping an eye on it. And like the day before said, we've done the drive. We are fine. We can get you to the hotel, and the floods have subsided. So I said, okay, it's a go. But the other thing I did, I have a friend who is on a military think group, and she has friends that are generals and colonels, and these people really have their ear to the ground. So when I got an invitation where I wasn't sure about, should I go to Iran or should I go to Kurdistan or Kazakhstan or some of these places I knew little about them, she would ask her generals. And they were a much better source than the State Department.
Yeah, I would imagine.
So they really knew. And they would say, like they said, Kurdistan will be fine. Now, what happened is Kurdistan got canceled before I went, but I said yes. They said, they said, right now, Iran would not be good. Said, you're going to a film festival, you will stand out as an American, and if any of those films are controversial, you could easily be a target. So don't go there. And they said, well, in Kurdistan, the Iraq war is going on just, a little bit south of there. They said, no, don't say yes to that. But they said yes to Nigeria because they said it's a southern city you would go to. And as it turned out, that got canceled also. But they said that city is safe. Don't go north and don't fly through Lagos to get to that city. Come in on your airplane on a different route, so you are never in the northern part of Nigeria. And I tried to learn the cultural norms. So I would write my host and say, what am I going to do that I shouldn't do? And they, in Egypt, I worked for a Christian group, and they said, don't drink alcohol in public. They said, now when you're at your hotel, if you want, I like to have a glass of wine at night. And they said, you can do that there. But when we all go out to public, don't, just have a mineral water or something. So
Yeah, that's important because that's how a lot of Americans end up in foreign prisons.
That's right.
Like,
yes.
they accidentally bring something they shouldn't or do something they shouldn't.
And we're not talking about like in the last 5 years. We're talking about 20, 30 or more years ago.
Yeah, well, because since I started in 87, in 88.
Okay.
And of course, many places were places as people go, Vienna and
Well, how do these people find you? Did you have an agent or something that booked these?
No, there was later on. There was an agent that did a screenwriting summit where several of us worked together, and we went to wonderful places, Mexico City and Tel Aviv, and some people that other people would have heard of, like Sid Field and John
Yeah.
Truby, Michael Haig, and Chris Vogler and me, as we he put us together. But that book opened the world to me. And so people would just contact me. The last seminar I did was in Latvia, and I think it was 2019. And I just decided that was going to be my last seminar. And I was excited just sort of being there. I had a friend when I was very young who had been a displaced person from Latvia and came to my little town of Peshtigo and lived there. And we were the same age. I met her when I was 7 and went all through school with Tamara. And so it was special for me to go back to where she had grown up. But another place they found me, there was an European conference in Spain, and they had people from all over Europe coming in as part of this 2-week conference. And I was one of the speakers, and I also consulted on their scripts. And so, I would go in there and work. Let's say I worked with the German German team, and they're in Spain, and they say, well, will you come over to Frankfurt? And I said, sure. So, well, let's plan that in 6 months. Let's do that. And so that nurtured, my business a lot. And one of the things my script consultant talked to me about is she would ask the question, what is the source of your success? Like the question you just asked, where are these invitations coming from? How do people find you to ask you to be a script consultant? And when she first asked me, I didn't know. And she says, okay, look at your clients of the last 2 months. Where did they come from? They came from Women in Film. I was a member of Women in Film. And she said, go to every meeting Women in Film has. I don't care if it's an acting class from Women in Film, and have your business cards, because that's the source of your success at the beginning. And, later it was the book, and then it was these conferences where people from various places were there, and they grew out from there. And then I dropped other people's names when I would do these conferences, because I wanted to help my colleagues also have these experiences. And at the beginning, I was traveling and about 6 guys, and we were all doing this individually. I was the only woman. I said, this has got to be equal out. And so I started letting my hosts know who were the women who were really good teachers, and they started traveling. And I made it an intention to try to equalize the playing field between women and men. And it only took 2 years of just intentionally dropping names and sometimes taking the woman's book with me. And I did that for men, as well. And if I couldn't take a job, I would always recommend a colleague. So group of us that were doing similar things, somewhere in the late 80s, we decided not to be competitors, but to be colleagues. And we said, let's not do this where it's always, am I better than you? And all that junk was, that easily goes on. And so we started, helping other people get jobs, helping them with their career. And the other thing that did, besides it really helped all of us, because, if I do this other person a favor, then they do me a favor back. But it also meant that we had happy careers. Our careers were not this kind of thing where you get irritated because you're colleague got that job instead of you, you're cheering them on and they're cheering you on. And so we had wonderful relationships a group of us, and I'm talking 10 to 20 people that were, you could sort of say who were the 5 that were doing a lot of traveling, but we knew people from conferences and we tried to introduce ourselves, and we went out to lunches together and said, I want you to meet so-and-so.
Yeah, that's good advice to have to
Yeah.
network and help other people and they help you. And I think that's really good advice no matter what you're doing. But because you should happy for other people when they succeed too.
Absolutely.
That's
But
really
so
great.
let's because we have to get ready for the next interview, but if you had to, you're sitting in front of a class at USC of freshmen who want to be screenwriters, and they're freshmen and their first year of screenwriting 101. What are you going to tell them?
Well, the first thing is, writers write and hopefully writers write because you love writing. And so get into writing classes. Many people who made it in Hollywood, they were editors on the school newspaper, and they were writing articles, and they were writing short stories, and they were writing scripts. I mean, I started writing when I was 13. I wrote my first novel when I was 13.
Whoa.
It was pretty short. It was 25 pages, but I spent 3 months writing it. And, get a writing discipline, but so that you are growing your craft from the beginning. And then be generous with other people. You'll read their scripts, they'll read yours. And so that and go to conferences so that you begin to have this group of people around you. You give them advice, they give you advice, they share resources.
Yeah.
And find the people. If somebody is just one of these people that's all for myself and they're holding it close, just say, well, I don't have to spend time with that person. That's not where I want to put my time. And I think another thing is, don't presume that you have nothing to offer. And so when we say you give somebody a gift, you give them the gift is not just your screenplay, but when you say to somebody, I found out about a new screenwriting contest, so let me share this information. But I learned also to not presume I didn't have a gift to give to what we call the higher ups. So when Ron Howard endorsed one of my books,
Wow.
I thought, I want to send him a thank you gift. Now you say, what do you send Ron Howard? He can have anything he wants. We have I'm in a little town of 600 in the Colorado Rockies. We have a gourmet popcorn store just across the road. And I said, I'm going to send him a big tin of different types of popcorn, the peanut butter popcorn and the pecan. And so it was great fun. And supposedly it got devoured very quickly. but I think that was another thing, was to learn the thank you note.
Gratitude. Yeah.
Because of
Absolutely.
time or
Absolutely.
whatever, is to don't just think, what am I taking? Who can help me?
Yeah.
To say, how can I help you? And you get a circle going. And I actually wrote a book on this kind of thinking. It's called Beyond Linear Thinking. And it's about moving from the model of the line, which ranks and divides people, to the model actually of the web, which you're just connected, with all these people, and you got these lines connecting you. And it's a more circular structure than a linear structure.
Saying that says something, I'm paraphrasing, but something like, don't let being nice be a tactic for success. Make it just part of your life and who you are, instead
That's
of
beautiful.
just, a tactic. Like, oh, I have to be nice to these people. I have to write a thank you note. Like, do it naturally. And it'll come back to you naturally.
Yeah.
Before we end, I have to say this is Cassie, and I gave her a dog treat before we started, thinking that was going to keep her occupied. And I was watching what she was doing. She was looking for a place to hide it. She finally hit it, and now here she is. So she made it. Oh, anyway, I was hoping that it would keep her busy for the hour, but it didn't.
Yes,
So
no
anyway,
problem.
here she is. But yeah, thank you so much, Linda. You have so much, a wealth of knowledge and so much to give. Thank you for sharing so many tips.
And I'll hold up the books.
Yes, please. Unpacking. And then the other books, do you have a website? Will we put your website in?
Linda Seger, just lindaseger.com. And then you can just look up books by Linda Seger if you want.
Okay.
But the lindaseger.com, has information on movies I worked on and places I went and, those kind of things.
Well, thank you so much, Linda. We really appreciate it. You had wonderful stories, and I know a lot of my friends in LA are going to be interested to hear this.
Yeah. It was so interesting. And I know you just have so much more. Maybe we'll have to have you back.
Yes, we'd be happy to come back, and thank you so much. This has been great fun.
Our pleasure.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Okay. Yes.
Bye.
Thank you.
All views expressed in this video belong to Kellie Nicholson, John D'Amore, and guests. These discussions do not represent the opinions of any entity whatsoever with which they have been affiliated now or will be in the future. The opinions expressed are solely theirs, and since they are critically thinking human beings, these views are subject to change, subject to revision, and subject to rethinking at any time. These conversations are not meant to be taken as advice and are only for the purpose of entertainment. All statements may be based on hearsay and not necessarily valid proof of any claims in this video. It is not our intention to teach or advise on any topic. Unless otherwise noted, all photos are public domain. Thanks for watching A Slice of Life with Kellie and John.